Hello ladies and gentlemen, I hope I'm going live about now, as you can see, with a new decorative object in the background. As I said, I'll probably hang it up sometime during the weekend. I'm still full of emotions, full of excitement after yesterday's Apple's Let Loose event with the iPad Air, the Apple Pencil Pro, a new Magic Keyboard, and of course the all-new super thin iPad Pro. And of course I spent like hours chatting with people on Twitter about everything that was announced. A lot of people seem to hate some of the announcements. A lot of people are jumping back to like, oh my god, iPad is like way too overpowered for the software that it has. I mean, we literally got like a new versions of Final Cut and Logic announced, but whatever. And WWDC is basically just around the corner, so one at least could wait until then. Also, there is no device with quite screen like that, so it's pretty useful, even if it's still an iPad, regardless. So yesterday was super duper exciting, and we had a lot of people tuning in. Let's see if we can replicate 1/10 of that today. I know that I didn't give quite a lot of time in advance, but it is what it is. I was still excited to stream. I hope if you are catching this live, please let me know in the comments. If you're catching this afterwards, I also still appreciate your support, of course. Now, I did want to start actually with a very, very good video from Mr. Who's the Boss. Like, I've always liked Mr. Who's the Boss. I think he has a nice presentation style. I think he has high production value. My only real problem with him usually comes down to the fact that like in his reviews he sometimes makes up categories almost on the spot. It's like his final winner is like very weirdly chosen, so that's where I usually disagree with him, and I have reacted to his videos in the past. However, his iPad Pro video is probably one of the most insightful pieces of iPad Pro coverage that I have seen thus far, and I just really want to react to that. Forget this note. This was when we were laughing together at the Humane AI pin. I don't think I will even take that many notes about his video. But this video is titled In Defense of iPad Pro, or to be more precise, of M4 iPad Pro. Now, if there are any OGs here who have been here since like, I don't know, 2,000 subscribers, so literally 100,000 subscribers ago, I have made a video basically in the relevancy beginning of this channel that said In Defense of the M2 iPad Pro, and based on that title you can guess when that video was released. It was basically 2 years ago. The problem with a lot of people's perception of iPad, to me, is that they try to define its value in a way that Apple never pitched it. Like, Apple absolutely pitches it as a computer replacement, but not as something that does absolutely every little thing that a Mac can do or a Windows PC can do. Apple has always said the limitations of the iPad, because it's somewhere between a phone and a laptop, are what also make it special. The fact that it is designed for multi-touch, the fact that it is designed to be thin and light and not have like an M Pro or M Max chip inside, and yet still feel incredibly fast, smooth, fluid, basically instantaneous reactions. It can do special things versus the Mac thanks to the Apple Pencil. It has this fun form factor where you just attach it to the Magic Keyboard in and off. And I've said that about every single iPad, or especially every single iPad Pro, ever since iPads were out. Now, as iPads got more expensive, the counter to that became more aggressive. And this is why I have spent basically years quote-unquote defending the iPad Pro, especially because the iPad Pro is the most expensive iPad. It is the one with the most expensive accessories. Well, at least it was. Now the Air has cheaper accessories. And yeah, and a lot of YouTubers, like I watched like MKBHD's video, he was like very, oh, it's still an iPad, but he was pretty excited about the hardware, so it's a very middle of the road video. The problem is that middle of the road doesn't really tell you anything. It just keeps the status quo going. However, the more people I have interacted with historically, and as people understood that, oh, the iPad might actually be more than enough for my use case, and then they got to love the iPad way more than any laptop they have ever owned before. Even if they had like crazy convertibles and stuff, they liked how much thinner, lighter it is. They liked how much more optimized it is for multi-touch than any Windows tablet or anything like that. And I have always told people, you would not have the iPad that we have now. You wouldn't have Apple experimenting with stuff like Stage Manager, right? And just different UI paradigms for the iPad if the iPad was always capable of just being a Mac, right? If it had like a backend to run Mac OS, or if it had the exact same applications, but those applications ran like crap in multi-touch and they were just optimized for keyboard and mouse, right? So my pitch was always, you have to live with some compromises, basically for the greater good, so that the iPad becomes the best it can be, and as the iPad learns, so do other devices around it. Stage Manager, as I mentioned before, is not just an iPad feature. It also came to the Mac, and as you can see from the way my Mac is set up, I use it all the time. In fact, I have turned it off on my iPad because I just prefer a regular split screen on my 13-inch iPad. 2 apps and 1 slide over app from time to time are more than enough for me on a screen like that. And obviously, iPad still is missing features. For example, I would love to be able to stream from my iPad, but I cannot do that, so I bought a Mac. Of course, that's an expensive purchase, and I don't encourage Apple to keep those limitations in place. I have said over and over again, they need to bring Xcode to the iPad. They need to bring more advanced functionality. I think the Files app needs to get closer in functionality to the Finder app, but the iPad should still stay the iPad. And this is why I want to use Mr. Who's the Boss's video as basically as a foundation for my discussion and basically my lawyerly case in defense of M4 iPad Pro. Let's get started. By the way, I was a little stupid today. I didn't check the audio arrangement. Please, if you're watching live, let me know if the audio of like the YouTube video and my own audio are like working together in an acceptable way, okay?
Big redesign. They are shockingly, almost concerningly thin.
Okay.
So these are the 2024 iPad Pros. They've had a pretty big redesign. They are shockingly, almost concerningly thin. They have a new chip, they have new display, new accessories.
By the way, if the quality of like the YouTube video is a little low, that's not my fault. I pre-download them in 1080p, but apparently the download bitrate is so ass that it looks more like a 480p video, like at best a 720p one, and I just don't want to use my Wi-Fi while I'm streaming in that way. So maybe I'm too careful, maybe it would still work out, but yeah, it's not Mr. Who's the Boss's video that his video looks like crap.
Long story short, these are the highest end, probably the most expensive tablets in the world. I just spec'd mine out over here, and it is coming to £2,877.
We will have a discussion about the exact pricing and specifications as we go throughout the iPad. I personally would probably go for the 1 terabyte model with 5G. I believe that would put me around $2,400 for the big model, as far as I know. Obviously it's more expensive here in Germany, but I do not plan on getting an M3 iPad Pro for the simple reason that an M4 iPad Pro, I apologize, because I still have a phenomenal M1 iPad Pro and I'm more than happy with it. And I would find it just wasteful unless I could get like an 80% like price of like the original cost, and I knew it would like get a good home. But for now, it's just too good. And for everything that is like really like where I need like a really high quality OLED screen, I would almost need that more on my MacBook, and I definitely have it already on my television. So it's not really worth the expenditure.
Which, if you convert that to dollars, is like 3,600, which is just...
You cannot do that because usually prices in like Europe and the UK, they are shown with value-added tax, while in the US it depends from state to state how much value-added tax you actually pay. Also, like the income in many ways in Europe for like the middle class is often higher, and it's not quite one-to-one.
I mean, that is just an obscene amount to pay for a tablet. But I am sitting here right now, hovering over the buy button, and I wanted to...
I mean, but also, let me be honest. If I had his finances with an 18.5 million subscriber channel that has been running for quite a while, and he has had like sponsorships and of course a lot of success in general, yeah, like in his case I would probably buy every single, like I probably would have still skipped the M2 iPad Pro unless I had somebody to give the M1 iPad Pro to, but like the M4 is such an easy slam dunk.
To make a video about this, because when I woke up today, I did not expect to be in this position. I am not an iPad guy. I use a smartphone, a smartwatch, a smart fridge, a smart air purifier. Hell.
Yeah, I had a smaller version of those. They don't produce the models that I want anymore, like those Dyson purifiers. And then they get too big, and that's not something I want for my apartment.
Well, I even use a smart toothbrush, but the one thing that I've really struggled to grasp is tablets. Because when I first started this channel, tablets were awesome. Phones were tiny, so there was a real need for size. Tablets had better quad-core processors and significantly more advanced software compared to...
Oh, Android Honeycomb, how I miss you. When Google was actually... I believe that if Android tablets had actually developed from this, and instead of basically getting a restart with what was it? Ice cream or jelly bean, right? Gingerbread and honeycomb. Like honeycomb was, I believe, the exclusive version, like for Android tablets. And I really, really liked that they were trying to do something that very much felt like a dedicated user interface for a tablet, right? They went with a 16:10 aspect ratio, so it wasn't quite as comfortable to me as an iPad. I think this aspect ratio works like really, really good for like an 8-inch tablet that you still want to hold in one hand. But for anything larger, I prefer it to be a little more square. However, it was pretty good for multitasking, especially if like by today's standards you just think of like regular split screen. Obviously that would basically be like 2 4:3 applications next to each other. And I liked the way they tried out with the widgets and stuff like that. I was so enamored by it. It still was like so far behind what the iPad was doing at that time. Like especially with the speed increase that the iPad 2 got over the original iPad. Like I understand why after this, and when Android tablets became to a large degree really just stretched out phone versions, including to the fact that like basically no major application still bothers to like do that much with like tablets. In fact, it took like the introduction of the Pixel Fold for Google to fully optimize their own applications for larger screens, for like more creative multitasking layouts and stuff like that. So Apple definitely has been at the forefront here. And if you want to also just basically constantly be migrating from your phone to your tablet, you kind of want it to feel as cohesive as possible. And the fact that your applications just feel more at home on iPad, but then if you put them in like the slide over thing, they basically feel like not a stretched out, but like an elongated iPhone version, then it really starts to feel like, oh, this is one ecosystem. Oh, this is one cohesive experience. And they never fully committed to that on Android. I think we would have a much healthier tablet ecosystem if we have had that. Instead, we focused mostly on like $200-300 tablets, very crappy processor. You can see by that screen, which I think is TFT, that like and that was like a relatively good tablet for its day.
Those simple phones. But then phones got good. Their screens doubled in size, they got a lot faster, they could handle multiple tasks at once, and as soon as that happened, the whole appeal of an iPad or an Android tablet evaporated for me. Like, why take around something that does what a phone does, but needs a laptop's worth of space without being able to do what a laptop does? That's the exact reason why in the 2015-2016 era, there was a massive drop-off in general tablet interest. But then
there is no denying that Apple has held on to pretty good iPad revenue by also systematically increasing the iPad price to counteract the dropped sales. They've introduced new models, everything from the iPad mini to now differently sized iPad Airs to iPad Pros in different sizes as well, although the original iPad Pro was the bigger iPad Pro, and then we still got a 9.7-inch version. Now, obviously, big always wins when it comes to smartphones. The Pro Max just got labeled the best-selling iPhone. On the iPad Air, Apple felt the need to introduce a 13-inch model. On the MacBook Air, they felt the need to introduce a 15-inch model. And just during the last event, they confirmed that the MacBook Air 13-inch is the world's best-selling 13-inch laptop, and that the 15-inch MacBook Air is the world's best-selling 15-inch laptop. So yeah, Apple filling out the lineups. As much as people complain that they're supposedly so complicated and so unruly, they definitely are doing it for a reason, but that's a diversion.
Then why am I sitting here right now, like the world's biggest hypocrite, about to spend basically a small car's worth of money on a tablet? Well, that's what I want to explain. For starters, I expected this thing to be thin. I mean, watching the Apple keynote, they didn't exactly hide the fact that the 11-inch iPad Pro is just 5.3 millimeters and that the 13-inch is just 5.1 millimeters, and therefore Apple's thinnest device ever. But even then, when
a small counter to Apple here. Apple was like not, well, it is quite a while ago, but it's not literally decades ago. Like when like the Galaxy S2 claimed that it was like thinner than the iPhone 4 and 4S. Apple was like angry about that because it actually had like a little hump in the lower portion of the device on the back. Which means it was thinner than the 9.3 millimeters or so of the iPhone 4, and the iPhone 4 obviously was like a sandwich. It was very even, but it was thicker at around that hump area. Now, obviously, this is a very thin tablet, but when you look at that camera protrusion, there it's definitely thicker than 5.1 or 5.3 millimeters. So I would state that the iPod Nano, that super thin version, is still the thinnest like consumer tech product ever made by Apple. We don't count like the Apple cloth or whatever. We are talking about actual technology.
Set up for the first time and I turned it around in my own hands. It still feels absolutely insane that I'm holding a full-on computer with an M4 laptop quality chip inside, because This thing is 579 grams. Okay, to give you some perspective, I take this remarkable writing tablet with me.
It's a cool thing. I've seen a lot of people work with it. This is what I've always advocated for e-ink devices should be, but I also would want it to be like at that point the full-on like ebook reader, PDF reader, right? I don't just want a page to write down stuff. This is the problem with like e-ink. I almost wonder if Apple should make like an e-ink iPad mini, because I believe at that point the productivity of that would be pretty insane, especially coupled with like the Apple Pencil and stuff.
Almost wherever I go, I found that no matter how much I do love my laptop and my phone, there's times where you just want to write on a big screen. You know, sometimes you want to plan out a YouTube thumbnail before you take it. We've actually been planning out what our future studio is going to look like when we move home. Sometimes you just want to sit in a coffee shop and brainstorm ideas or draw up concepts for a product. It all needs a pen. And this thing, this black and white 10-inch e-ink tablet that does, well, basically one thing, this is just over 400 grams. So I'm thinking, damn.
Yeah, so, and I've talked about that time and time again. I've talked about that in my M2 Defense iPad Pro video, like back in the day. Tablets have, especially iPads, especially iPad Pros, have a very impressive form factor. Now, of course, they're missing like a keyboard and trackpad for that, but again, it's a big multi-touch screen, which changes and adapts to what you want it to be. So it can be basically full screen with a little bit of bezel for like palm rejection. It can be thin and light because it can have a high quality chip, but it doesn't necessarily need to like run it at full force for long. So it can it can basically have a slightly smaller battery than a comparable laptop and a slightly smaller cooling arrangement. Then it can use some space for like the speakers, especially like the impressive quad speakers. Then you basically give it a camera, give it some more simplified smartphone components when it comes to like the motherboard. Like you have like one powerful USB-C port, you don't need like 3 or 4 ports, right? You keep a little bit of space extra for like a 5G antenna and you're basically golden. I seriously don't understand why this doesn't get more respect. And yes, of course, you can just lift this up and hold it, while with a laptop, it gets much less comfortable. Fadel Al-Turki, is there actual criticism of the iPad Pro besides the prices increase? I feel kinda out of the loop here. The problem is, it's basically not even criticism towards the iPad Pro. It's more of like a philosophical discussion that gets like rehashed every time we get a more powerful iPad. I feel like because this iPad Pro has like this fantastic screen, it also has like more base storage, like it almost gets away with the price increase, but then it gets like lambasted for the same reasons as the M1 iPad Pro was, as the M2 iPad Pro was. I still think that more reasonable people are at least holding out until like WWDC before they really get a super duper aggro on it. But overall, yeah, there is a healthy amount of unhealthy criticism, because if you go to a place like Twitter, which I know is not a real place, but you will find like the same comment over and over again. And I believe even here, this is what I mean. And you can find this full on Facebook, Twitter. Imagine spending a PC worth. It is a PC, by the way. It's a personal computer, but whatever. I know they mean probably like a powerful tower. Worth of money on a tablet just to find a kid watching YouTube Kids on it. So what? Even if your kid watches YouTube Kids on your stuff. Like, my nieces watch YouTube Kids on my stuff. My nephew does whenever I visit him. What's the problem? Like, so the kids get like the best possible screen on the world for YouTube Kids. Most powerful YouTube and Netflix machine. Marquez nonchalantly doing his own review across the table. Okay, that's different. We need a comparison. Jerry Rig. Oh, that's because the iPad is so thin. The bend test. The different Magic Keyboard has to do with the different device. It's Jesus, You're getting the tablet because A, you can afford it, and B, you're a top tech reviewer and can't be left out. That is not true. He gives us like 20 reasons throughout this video why he likes the iPad, and yes, of course, being able to afford it is a big portion of why you buy something. Yeah, so I already mentioned it, but this is what he's been basically laying out thus far, that yeah, at least this iPad Pro is like an impressive form factor. iPad Pro now serving MacBook Airs for breakfast. Okay, that's somewhat funny. I am one of 99% of watchers. This is bullshit, by the way. Apple sells like 10 million iPads per quarter. This idea that who will never buy iPad but will watch every single one of your reviews. You're a weirdo, man. I love how when discussing doing work on a device, literally all YouTubers talk about video and photo editing as if that is what we all work on. That is true. Aaron definitely, like, I would say the only like pro group, even like less so than like 3D artists that need like a professional CAD application. Usually they would also need more power though than an iPad or a MacBook Pro could give them. I would say the main pro group that is really underserved by the iPad is programmers. I think that Xcode needs to come to the iPad, absolutely. And I believe the iPad has enough power for just like regular Xcode. He was so impressed. I love to find. As a wise man in the MKBHD comment section said, it's just a nerfed MacBook. Yeah, it's such just a nerfed MacBook that it has a faster processor than the MacBook Air. It has front and back cameras, including a front camera that does center stage, something no Mac, well, the iMac does, but no MacBook. It has a better screen that in many ways than even the iPhone, but certainly than any Mac, with like highest SDR brightness, fastest pixel response time, stuff like that. It has like Apple Pencil support. Sure, it's just a nerfed MacBook. Jesus, people. The smart toothbrush. Yeah, the smart toothbrush scene was funny because of the whole. It's fun watching Mr. Rooster Boss discover the iPad for the first time. Like, he's mainly excited about the thing iPad has done for a long time. Yes, but this is why the video is also good. Because people need sometimes to be reminded about. This is the first time since like 2013 that it really felt to me like tablets are not just big phones. Said while swiping up on the home bar on an 11-inch tablet to show an iPhone home screen. That is simply not true. Like, just the aspect ratio alone makes the iPad's home screen such a different proposition. And also I could just show you my Mac's home screen, and except for the couple of documents that I have on the right that I hide for the OBS reasons, like everything else is just like an empty screen and a couple of widgets, the same as on my iPhone. And those documents, I just cannot be bothered to pull them away from the desktop. I don't actually need them to be on the desktop. Also, there is like a Files app widget that shows you like your recent files and stuff like that. It's complete bullshit. The million tech YouTuber saying he will replace his laptop, but never. No, he will not fully replace his laptop. That is, we will go through the video. People are actively lying. Oh, Jesus. Okay, let me continue before I get too angry.
I mean, I don't even normally care too much about the weight of stuff. I pretty much always buy the Plus, the Max, the biggest gadget you can get. And to be honest, it is also so slim that it is a bit concerning. I feel like we've been here with the iPhone 6 in 2014, and we all know how that turned out. But I do...
No, we don't. We had, I believe the official number was 13 reports of devices that got like bent in somebody's bag jeans. And I'm a big guy, and I had the iPhone 6 Plus, and I kept it in my bag jeans, and never had issues, but, so it wasn't even a universal issue, even for rather large people. So yeah, and then the iPhone 6s got you a slightly better like aluminum alloy, and then there were 0 issues left, and even then the iPhone 6 issues have been vastly overstated. This is the curse of Jerry Rig Everything, a channel that I consider pretty worthless in the grand scheme of things. I am all for keeping companies accountable for problems that pop up with devices, but I actually prefer those problems to pop up in actual real life scenarios and not while setting fire to a device or trying to bend it with the full force of an adult man. Like, it is what it is. It is the internet. But yeah, like believe me, I am slightly worried if this iPad might be more bendable. Now it does have some advantages over previous iPad, like it does not have a SIM card slot anymore. It's fully eSIM. It doesn't have the plastic opening where the millimeter wave stuff is. So it has like fewer structurally weak elements. I'm also not sure if they like redesigned the attachment place where the Apple Pencil connects and charges. So I hope that that is not a very weak element, because usually iPads will bend around that. But yeah, but I would just buy a Pitaka case and put it on the back and actually protect my iPad and still keep it super thin and light, and never worry not just about bending but also about scratches, dents, stuff like that, stuff that isn't avoidable anyway, like without a case. So why overanalyze just the bending aspect if you probably would put it in a case anyway?
Get it here. I think for something like this, much more than on a phone, it's important to be this weightless, because this 13-inch iPad Pro is just light enough. And I say just because it is on the line, and after about 20 minutes I was feeling it, but for me I can just about comfortably hold it with one hand and write with the other. And so this is starting to feel like it could perfectly slot into my life instead of this, but just with the perks of being able to do a lot more.
Yes, that is 100% correct. My only complaint with the original iPad, and of course my 2015 iPad Pro, and then of course my M1 iPad Pro, is that those devices have been rather heavy. They have all been 1.5 pounds. Maybe the 2015 iPad Pro, the larger one, was actually even a little heavier than that. And that was like the original weight, right, of the 2010 iPad. And then when the iPad 2 was introduced, Steve Jobs on stage said the iPad 2 goes to I believe 1.33 pounds or something like that. So it's 0.2 of a pound lighter than the original iPad. And on stage he said, that might not sound like a lot, but once you go down to 1.5 pounds, every 1/10 of a pound starts to actually feel like a lot. And I remember how big the difference between the original iPad and the iPad 2 felt. And don't forget, the iPad 2, even for its day, was like, oh, it's less than a centimeter thick? That's too thin. Apple could have given us even more battery life, because the original iPad was like 13 millimeters. And then the iPad 2 was like 8.8, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me if somebody is way smarter or has just a way better memory. So yeah, he makes absolutely the right case. The fact that he holds this, of course this is even lighter, but this is not a very multifunctional device, so why should he be holding it all the time? The Mac is way more even multifunctional if you take like the more pro apps, and of course it's higher performance, but it's a completely different form factor. And even ignoring the form factor, like the lightest MacBooks are about 3 pounds, like 2.7, 2.8. You might not necessarily need a case or something around them, but they're also like, especially if they're open, they're just, the weight distribution is a mess for just holding them while using. So yeah, it's absolutely incomparable. And yeah, I hold my iPad like this basically all the time, or I just prop it up somewhere. The way I, for example, propped up this silver play button that I got yesterday from YouTube for this community reaching 100,000 subscribers. I had no need of mentioning that right now, but I really felt like doing it. So thank you for indulging me. Let's continue for now.
Like, for example, potentially replace my laptop too. And I can't quite believe I'm saying this, because trust me when I say I love my MacBook. I take this thing even if I'm leaving home for like 30 minutes. My family is mildly concerned that I will still be using this in one arm while walking up the aisle at my own wedding. Can neither confirm nor deny. But
congrats. His wedding plans are official, so congratulations.
When I use this new iPad and the new Pro Pencil and the new Magic Keyboard all together, this is the first time since like 2013 that it really felt to me like tablets are not just big phones, that their capability feels like it has reached a tipping point, at which point I'm actually sitting here questioning if I even need this.
The capabilities he will mostly talk about are capabilities that we have been talking about since like the M1 iPad Pro and even a little before that. Basically since the introduction of the Magic Keyboard and the way that iPad finally allowed you to connect USB-C accessories, and with Thunderbolt it actually allowed you to connect even more like power-hungry accessories. So it went from like USB docks, SD cards, HDMI adapters, all that jazz. Though my Sabrent HDMI adapter, which is supposed to be like Thunderbolt to HDMI 2.1 somehow never worked, so I have no idea. It never worked on my MacBook or my iPad, by the way, so even though both were specifically listed in their compatibility page. Now this is neither here nor there, but I just felt like complaining about that for a little.
Because, well, this is the new Magic Keyboard, and while I know it might look like one of those cheap Amazon Folio cases from the outside, using it is actually crazily similar to using a Mac.
It maybe from the back a little, because everything sort of looks the same from the back, but I've seen like videos with this Magic Keyboard. It just looks amazing.
So on the inside there's a metal finish now, the trackpad is bigger, this is a charging port, and then if you want to plug in other things you can use the other USB port on the iPad itself. But what was very cool to me is that the second you snap the iPad into the case, it also controls like a Mac. It's like every bit of muscle memory that I've had from years of using a MacBook, it all translates perfectly.
By the way, my biggest complaint, it's not even that this iPad isn't compatible with older Magic Keyboards. My complaint here is that the new iPad Air is not compatible with this Magic Keyboard. Is it because the thinness? Because the overall like shape and form factor is still like similar enough. Like I just don't know what would prevent the compatibility here. Now I understand they've built like more functionality, like there's even like higher pass-through charging. I believe it up to 60 watts now through that auxiliary USB-C port. But this has been like my only complaint. Like, for example, people who complain that the Apple Pencil Pro doesn't work on older iPads, or that this doesn't work with the Apple Pencil 2. Guys, this is what happens if you ask Apple to relocate the camera from here to here. This is why the Apple Pencil needed a new magnetic attachment and charging mechanism. It might look the same from the top, because obviously Apple still wanted it to look and feel the same, but it had to be noticeably internally different. This is why this camera, for example, isn't even perfectly centered, neither horizontally nor vertically. So Apple, in basically adhering to customer demands, really had to do a compromise, and this is why it is the way it is. Now with the Magic Keyboard, except for the thinness, I don't quite get the same vibe. But maybe more detailed breakdowns will show us why it is the way it is.
swiping gestures, the quick shortcuts. You can also just hold the command key at any time to see all the shortcuts available within any app you're using. But even the quick functions like brightness control, volume control, the search bar, I was just so surprised by how usable the iPad is without even touching the screen. Also, the hinge. Now, there's obviously no way that you're going to be able to get a laptop quality hinge like this fitted into a thin iPad case. But what's quite cool is because the new iPad basically weighs nothing, you don't really need one. When you see the case, it definitely raises doubts about being usable in a car or on your lap, but my first impression from actually typing on it is actually that it's way more solid than it looks. It's not perfect though. The downside seems to be that the trackpad is still not quite full MacBook Pro size, and
which the iPad helps actually with its aspect ratio of being taller, but I'm glad he's discovering the iPad for himself with this iPad and not the previous iPad Pro, because there the Magic Keyboard obviously was far more compromised. Now, he is saying basically that he believes that the functionality is at a tipping point. In my opinion, it has less to do with the fact that it would cross into like real laptop category in terms of functionality. To me, it has everything to do with like, what are your use cases? Like, and basically every student I have ever known has owned an iPad, right? Why not? Because you get like a tablet that is thin, light, very easy to move around with. It does your notes, it does documents in a pinch, it sends emails, it receives them, it does calendars, reminders, it syncs with your iPhone, it has a back camera to quickly scan documents. It does basically everything you need. And this idea that it needs Xcode or it needs the full-fledged version of Final Cut or whatever, this has always been like a subjective thing. This is why I've always said, whether iPads can replace computers is an objective question with like objective answers. But then it's very dependent on the situation. So the answer just isn't a uniform yes or no, but it can be a 100% yes for certain use cases. And then it can be basically a 100% no for many others. This is why when people just try to say the iPad is limited, have you actually asked people if those are their use cases? And he will talk about more stuff that I fully agree with. Now, I will criticize some of it because he seems to be not very informed on what is possible on Windows 11, but we'll get there when we get there.
Hinge doesn't go all the way back, it locks around here. And the main one actually is that this thing's £350 here in the UK, and it doesn't seem like the iPad Pro works with any other Magic Keyboard, so you have to buy the new one.
Yeah, but every other Magic Keyboard is also as expensive.
Then there's also this new...
Well, is it compatible with like the Folio keyboards? Those are crap anyway, but I don't actually think that this supports anything other. And I think Apple's excuse is sort of like, well, this starts at $1,000. At that point, you really should consider getting a $300 or $350 keyboard.
Apple Pencil Pro, which has its own perks compared to the normal Apple Pencil. I do find it so funny the way they talk about all their products. Like, I'm pretty sure they introduced this with, it takes the pencil experience to a whole new level.
Apple Pencil Pro. It takes the pencil experience to a whole new level. Wow.
But this is funny.
Now,
the wow from Tim is a good meme. The issue I have with that, they are actually correct. The way they've shown what the Procreate guys do with the gyroscope feature inside it really felt like nothing else that I've ever seen from like a tablet stylus. I'm not very familiar with like what the Wacom tablets can do specifically, and yes, I know that you can attach like a Surface Dial to your Surface Studio and have it do separate tricks alongside your like Surface Pen. But when it comes to just a regular tablet with an attached a pencil, it just felt unique. It just felt super advanced. And I say that even before having felt like the fact that it has like haptic feedback and features like that. So I would add that basically it's unique functionality versus laptop, like traditional laptop. I would just say like MacBook in this case, right? Like there are some laptops obviously that have like touchscreens and digitizers for digital styli, but it's still not the same. That form factor just feels uniquely correct for that usage.
My brief time with it, I did find it a little bit fiddly. Like, there's quite a few times where I misattached it and therefore dropped it. And we had
I wonder, by the way, if that magnet is now in any way weaker or something like that. I hope not.
a couple of pairing issues too, so not a brilliant first impression. But then when it's actually in use and it works, it is very interesting. There's some new stuff here that I'm not too bothered about, like barrel roll, which thanks to new gyro sensors can allow you to rotate your
I like the idea is I wouldn't even be like using the gyroscope like barrel roll stuff myself. It's just that it just feels right that it has such a feature. I don't know, just looking at the Real Pro fully leveraging all those features, it just feels right.
pencil, just like using a real pencil and using different parts of the nib for different thicknesses. But then on the other hand, the fact that you can now just squeeze it to bring up your menu, that's awesome. That's going to save you a lot of time because, I mean, the old pencil didn't have any kind of button, so your thumb had nothing to do. It was like a lost function. The fact that there's now a vibration motor inside, which creates this satisfying little snap when you're doing things. And also the fact that you can now add it to Find My in case you lose it. That's pretty important because I'm pretty sure I'm going to lose it. So it looks like
I lost one Apple Pencil back in the day, but that was before they were magnetically attachable.
a laptop. But does it run like a laptop? Well, Apple didn't actually just kit this new iPad Pro out with the same M3 chip that you get on the latest MacBook Airs. They actually went one further and announced a whole new generation M4 chip that goes in here. How much faster is it than M3? I couldn't really tell you, to be honest. The way that Apple talks about performance jumps is actually really annoying because sometimes they compare to M3, sometimes they compare to M2, sometimes they compare to...
Actually, like, I understand, believe me, the annoyance, but the problem is that the truth is that Apple doesn't see the comparisons as like an exercise in benchmarking, right? They're not hardware unboxed. What Apple sees in those small comparisons, especially for the iPad, is they compare to a device that is now can be reasonably expected to be updated, right? Now, I would fully believe if this was an M3 iPad Pro that they might honestly not even be comparing to an M2 version because they would be saying, well, I mean, it's a one processor jump. Sure, the screen is nicer, but like it probably won't entice like M2 users. So let's just compare it to M1. Of course, they shouldn't even be comparing M4 to M3 because obviously M3 currently only exists in laptops and M4 currently only exists in this iPad Pro, and its immediate predecessor was the M2 iPad Pro. But yeah, so I can understand some of the criticism towards Apple's benchmarks. This is an area where, like, as a tech nerd, I myself would appreciate more openness. But fundamentally, it doesn't really change anything because 2 weeks after an event, when like tech reviewers have like their hands on those devices and run benchmarks, run tests, give us comprehensive reviews, then it's all cleared up anyway.
M1, and they'll always give you numbers based on really niche use cases as opposed to the more general ones that would matter to all users. Like,
that's actually not true. They've given like some decent, like the problem is if they were like giving you like Safari benchmarks, yes, the benchmarks actually get higher and higher, but I would argue that stuff like web browsing or email or calendars, like they don't actually even improve that much anymore. They're way more dependent on like, if you have like a decently fast like NVMe SSD, if you aren't bottlenecked by like RAM demands or something like that, then you are fine pretty much with any relatively modern CPU. It is those more niche use cases that actually show off those changes. So yeah, I know it's not the favorite response, but I actually agree with Apple here that we don't need like quite the same approach as we would see like more like between PCs.
App opening speeds. But I think the high-level takeaway should be probably not a massive jump from M3, but because the iPad hasn't actually been updated since the M2 chip, and because this new iPad has better thermal design that can keep temperatures more under control.
Yeah, they gave the processor a graphene pad, which is basically rumored to come to the iPhone 16 Pro, to actually the entire iPhone 16 family. And they I don't know if they made the entire Apple logo out of copper or if like they based it partially on copper, but they basically, and because copper is like the best heat conductant element out there, I believe, like, what is better? I believe silver is better than copper, right? But aluminum is worse than copper, something like that. So they basically improved the thermals of the device by 20% according to them. And given that I never had issues with my M1 iPad Pro, and that I never saw people have issues with the M2 iPad Pro in terms of thermals, and that the M4 is actually said to be much more efficient than the M2, that bodes really, really well in my opinion for like the thermals of the device, even if you have it at like a high brightness level on the screen.
Actually pretty huge. And it's going to be a lot faster than like Samsung's current tablets. They're still using phone chips, which is one of
so fast and smooth. I would say that and I will actually do it like this. Why a premium tablet, right? Like the fast and smooth also comes from the user interface. It's because everything you do feels so direct because you interact with your touch. It makes it much more pronounced if there are actually hiccups or whatever. And if this is, for example, why when the Pixel Slate came out, right, that ultra slow thing that had like different Intel processors as options. It was slow, yes, but it felt disproportionately slow because it's a tablet, because you touch something, and on an iPad you basically expect something to happen instantaneously. This is why, to me, the way that like they're targeting this. Oh, by the way, let me just do one quick thing. I want to connect my iPhone to my iPad through a cable. I forgot that. And I hope that the battery doesn't run out because I didn't charge it today. I hope this didn't end the stream or whatever. And yeah, so the fast and smooth thing was basically a requirement for the iPad in many ways, and Steve Jobs really, really demanded that even like the original iPad felt smooth. Now, obviously, it got a lot faster with the A5 and later processors, but I actually fully understand what he means by that. It's the fact that the iPad, you carry it around with you. It already feels much more intuitive. It feels much more comfortable. Then you touch it, and then whatever you touch instantly responds to you, and it gives you that unique functionality also with stuff like Apple Pencil. You just quickly grab it. It all just feels much, much more instantaneous than any laptop. Like, you can use an iPad even without a Magic Keyboard, and it still has basically all the same functionality, maybe not quite to the same degree as if you have like a cursor on the screen, but whatever. But yeah, that smoothness, that instant response time, especially now with like an OLED screen, that is not something you can really get while you're carrying around a laptop like that, the way he had shown.
The key reasons that I've been hesitating moving to one of those. We should get one thing clear. This is only about 50% as powerful as my MacBook Pro. And if you're actually going to kit it out with the pencil and the keyboard and everything, then you're actually paying a lot more per unit of performance than you do on Mac. And it isn't even going to do 100% of what a Mac can do, because iPad OS, which is based on iOS, is designed to be simpler. But the way that I've started to see this is, I mean, as soon as something like this can do the things that normally require this, surely it's an absolute no-brainer to be doing those things on the iPad. And
yes,
for my uses,
that
like
is,
today might be the day where we've just reached that
level.
I mean,
is perfect. If you can do here, let's pretend that this is the iPad. What you can do here, then why wouldn't you do it here, right? Now, there is the question of like performance differentials. So in some cases you can say, well, you can do the same thing, but this thing will get it done quicker. That's a good response. This is the reason why 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros exist. This is the reason why M3 Pro, M3 Max exist. This is the reason why M2 Ultra exists. why very likely we'll get like an M4 Ultra processor. But because this feels simpler, faster, smoother, it thinner, lighter, still very functional, of course you would do it here, especially if price is no consideration.
Massive, very heavy laptop and my remarkable tablet for just one iPad in totality, that would change my life. I would be cutting the weight and the size of my tech by about 5 times. But also, I feel like in a lot of ways, the iPad can actually do things even better than the Mac can. Like, I think for the most part, mobile apps are a lot better designed than computer apps. Like games. I mean, gaming on a Mac kind of sucks, and I genuinely think I would get a lot more gaming utility from this ironically less powerful device than I do my current spec to the max MacBook, just because iOS and iPadOS, they're built for games. But also, even bigger picture, I just feel like a lot of mobile apps are way better designed than their laptop alternatives. Like, mobile photo editing is now so good that half the time I'm actually sending stuff from my laptop to my phone to.
And part of that has again to do with the direct input method, the ability to use the Apple Pencil. I do all my my thumbnails on my phone. I did the thumbnail for today's video while actually working out. And small breaks during at the gym. And yeah, the same goes from the iPad. And a lot of those apps, by the way, are also cheaper on the iPad. For example, like I use like Pixelmator on the iPad, and it's cheaper than the Mac version. All that stuff from also just the way that like LumaFusion, the way it feels like super optimized and smooth for multi-touch, and it's way cheaper than any like professional video editor. Will it be as functional as a professional video editor? No, but at that point I would probably want like a 16-inch MacBook Pro to work on that kind of stuff instead of like a 13-inch MacBook Air that is obviously more comparable to like a 13-inch iPad Pro. So yeah, I actually agree, and he will now list several things that I do have one criticism, but yeah, usually mobile apps on iPad, this does not apply to Android, just feel like they are actually done for the entire screen. That aspect ratio that just feels a little taller, like it gives you a little more content. And on Mac, you usually interact more with websites, and even on Windows where you get like more apps and you have like web apps, but it does not feel the same. Not every web app, even in like a Chromium package, gives you offline functionality the way like a native iPad application does. Of course, it also helps that you just discover everything through one store, ideally. Which brings us also to like simpler. So there's a lot.
And it's not just cute little phone apps on the iPad. I was literally today using the exact same Pixelmator app that I currently use on my Mac. It didn't seem like any function was missing or cut back. And every single command that's instant on my Mac was also instant on the iPad. The only times I noticed a difference were when there were super intense things that required loading bars. And then those loading bars did last about 50% longer on the iPad.
Yeah, that is absolutely fair. This is what faster, like actively cool devices are for.
We're currently in the process of planning out our smart future home, and everything is controlled by apps. It's all designed to work off, well, basically iPads, because times have changed. 10 years ago, we were living in a PC-first world, and swapping your laptop for an iPad, it would be seen as a move only filthy casuals would make. But I'm starting to feel pretty strongly like that's not the case anymore. I mean, now, services are often designed primarily with the app in mind first. And because the apps are designed around phone touchscreens and phone hardware, more often than not, I find them way more intuitive and optimized. Tell me if you feel the same, but
yeah, like you can run a lot of that stuff still on the Mac, and there are some Windows 11 like more native applications, but it still doesn't compare to just using your banking client, like your smart home controls and everything on a phone. And then even if you have to use like a stretched out version, that still feels better on a tablet than often the website does on like a laptop.
Feel way better when a product tells me to use their app than when they direct me to a website. And so the iPad, which is the biggest, most powerful form that you can experience those optimized apps in, is becoming way more appealing to me. So then I'm thinking, okay, what else do I do on my laptop that I might struggle with here? Google Docs? But that's actually better on iPad because you can actually browse all your stuff even while offline.
Yeah, it's also a very like performant application. I don't know if it's written like with the web backend, but it feels pretty native, at least according to what I've heard from people who use it.
can't do on Mac. I check draft videos before we post them using this website called Frame.io. It makes it really easy to leave comments at different parts. But then I looked it up and there is a specifically made iPad app for it. And I also still sometimes edit videos, far less than I used to because thankfully we have some really good editors now, but I still sometimes put together the music for our
Oh, the success of a big channel.
videos or do some editing for personal stuff. Like we made this video invite for our wedding. It's very cute. But the point is, iPad has
Congrats
Final Cut
again
Pro
on the
as well
wedding.
now. They actually just announced Final Cut Pro 2 just for the iPad. I don't actually think it's a Final Cut Pro successor like the name might imply, but it is very much a full video.
No, but it is, in my opinion, it shows like a commitment to further work on that application, right? It feels like different from like just saying, oh, it's a 0.1 release, like saying like, oh, okay, like about a year ago we introduced Final Cut and Logic for iPad. This is now the second version. In between you will still get smaller releases, so by about like next year's WWDC I would like expect like a third major version, and step by step I expect it to basically catch up to the Mac, except for like Finder stuff or whatever.
Editing experience. I did find it pretty fiddly when trying to use Final Cut with the touchscreen. It just feels like a strange intersection that can never really be as efficient as using a precise trackpad. But when I tried it with the keyboard attached, different story. In moments, I actually forgot I was using an iPad. Do you see what I'm saying?
It's versatile, right? Those like unique features, accessories, they make the iPad like sometimes be an iPad, sometimes be a lot more like a laptop. If you connect it to like an external screen, you can forget it basically like a Mac Mini in a way if you are comfortable with using Stage Manager. So yeah, absolutely.
It almost feels like all the perks of a laptop when you want one, but combined with all the perks of a mobile when that suits you more. You know, everything being a sleek app instead of a clunky website, which is definitely the way to go for most banking services, social media, Uber, Deliveroo, actually Netflix too. Movies is a massive one, to be honest, because almost all of these video streaming platforms, they are all infinitely better on phones because they actually let you download stuff offline. It all feels a bit silly to me, but essentially because computer OSs are more open, it would be easier to pirate things if you could download offline on there. But on an iPad, well, it kind of gets a free pass because it's still running a mobile operating system. But a mobile operating system with the media experience of a high-end laptop. Oh, we should probably talk about this screen actually. So this is an OLED screen. Well, technically, actually, it's two OLED screens stacked on top of each other to be able to get the deep contrast benefits of OLED, but also the ultra-high brightness that Apple wants for HDR. Apple is basically saying that this is the best screen they've ever made for a consumer device. They're calling it the Ultra Retina XDR display. And it looks, unsurprisingly, very good. The contrast is the biggest thing that I noticed. Like, when you're watching stuff with blacks, those blacks are so deep, it's like you're staring into a void. And again, it feels so trippy. There's such a big disconnect because you don't expect a screen this good on a device so thin. Like, if you're
Yeah, so this device is obviously architecturally very impressive. And I would just add, like, in my defense of the M4 iPad Pro specifically, right, not only is it a continuation for what makes a premium tablet great, but it has now laptop level power in many ways. The M4 is even more powerful than an M3 MacBook Air. And it has a best-in-class display, which obviously brings up its value, further justifies the higher price point than before. Now, I could add like more hyper-specific things like the great speakers, but iPad Pros have had great speakers for a while. The Thunderbolt port, again, Thunderbolt hasn't been on iPads for a while. The decent back camera, this has more to do with like tablets in general. So yeah, like the M4 specifically has a lot of great stuff.
ordered a monitor for your computer and it was this thin, you would already be in awe. And yet, this isn't just your monitor, this is your full-on computer, it's your camera, it's your touchscreen, it's kind of crazy. Now, they've also added in the option for a nano texture screen, which they're saying scatters the ambient light to reduce glare, but also without any reduction in brightness. It definitely seems to work as advertised, and it might actually solve the MacBook's visibility issues, but this is also how the cost starts to rack up. This is how I got where I ended up, because you basically have to spend a minimum of $2,000 to get a nano coating on your
Well, does he need a nano coating? I thought he needed, well, I thought he might want like the full performance, right? And the fully unbinned chip, right, is in the 1 and 2 terabyte options. This is where you get the 10 core M4. In the 256 and 512 gigabyte versions, you still get the 9 core version with one performance core of the CPU disabled. But it's interesting. like the nano display options, texture option is also only on 1 and 2 terabytes. But my issue with that is you really shouldn't be necessarily considering the nano texture glass. It's not really for everyone.
13-inch iPad. Also, one thing, Apple didn't mention battery life at all during the presentation. Their site says that the new one has about the same battery life as the old one, but given that we've now got 2 panels firing at the same time, it's
that is actually wrong. This is not how technology works. This is not how brightness works. Using those OLEDs in tandem, that's why it's used, called that way. It's the same way that like riding a tandem bicycle. Well, that's different because tandem bicycle might also have like different aerodynamics. Could be easier for both people, even though both are like doing doing half of now twice the work, right? But the way that now the strength is distributed helps you. Now that depends a little bit because obviously weight and air and stuff like that become different considerations. But no, like everything that we've heard about tandem OLED is that together 2 screens actually are way more efficient because the output is still that of basically 1 screen. This is why I've tried to. It's interesting because Apple sort of proved me wrong in the way they talk about it. Because they basically make it sound like it's just 2 OLED screens on top of each other, and it is, but they're basically glued together. Like they're like it's on a very architecturally complex process because the alignment of those OLEDs. Obviously, you now only need 1 power source. You now only need 1 display driver, right? So there's changes here, but yeah, it's not 2 panels fighting each other or anything. No, it's 2 light emitters with one on top of the other, so that they actually produce the same result. But because one is shining on the other, they're helping each other. They're not like. And I mean, even if you just want to imagine it that way, think of, in the worst case, if it worked the way he imagines it, then for regular brightness, for not the 1000 nits, it would only use the top layer, right? Now, again, it doesn't work that way because those are not 2 completely individually working panels. But in his scenario, this is how it would work. But no, it doesn't. But because they're glued together, because they're supportive of each other, because each one can now be thinner and therefore reducing the resistance of the electrical current, they are both significantly more efficient than 1 individual panel. And then since they both aim to produce 1 final result, this is how you get like a very, very efficient output.
Definitely something that I want to keep a very close eye on.
Also, by the way, the 11-inch iPad Pro gets a 9% larger battery. So definitely a lot of things to look forward there. And the 13-inch iPad Pro has a 4 to 5% reduction in battery capacity. Given that OLED, though, is supposedly much more efficient at higher brightness, well, this kind of OLED, than even the mini LED panel, I would assume that the 11-inch iPad actually gets a nice increase in battery life, while the 13-inch iPad keeps about the same battery life. This would be my speculation. Apple also said that the M4 delivers the peak performance of the M2 at half the power consumption, which is insane. This goes far beyond the efficiency gain that we would usually associate with moving from N5P, which is the transistor node that M2 was built on, versus N3E, which is now the 2nd generation 3 nanometer node. So there's basically 1 full node jump in between, and that node jump definitely doesn't promise twice the efficiency. So whatever Apple is doing with like depending a little more on efficiency cores, the new core design, slightly different clock speed tuning, it definitely seems to be working well. And given that you probably won't be forcing the tablet to be constantly constantly hitting 4 gigahertz or whatever on the tablet, you probably are very, very sitting very, very nicely on that efficiency curve. And this is why I would speculate the battery life might actually be surprisingly better than people expect. A lot of people said, well, Apple just made like MKBHD videos. If you go to it, he says, he said, I have to assume that the physical battery is a lot smaller. And I'm like, bro, you posted this video like hours after the event. You couldn't have gone to Apple's tech specs website. Like, here it is. Like, Apple's website, you go to iPad, you go to iPad Pro. I'm taking the longest way for that possible. I'm waiting for the animation. Here, iPad Pro is the first one that comes up. You just click on tech specs. Now you can Control F to find it, but no, is it Command F? I always forget what I actually click for it. But you can also scroll down if you want to waste your time, the way I did yesterday during live stream. And then I believe I once again over scrolled to be very dramatic. Camera, chip. Am I stupid? Speakers, location, sensors, charging and expansion, display support, power and battery. There it is. And now you can find the battery capacities of these iPads. Now, again, we've researched it. The previous big iPad had 40.88. So basically a negligible difference of around 5%. And the previous 11-inch iPad had like 29 or something like that, or even a little below that. So that's like an almost 10% increase. And MKBHD couldn't be bothered to do that, this is why I'm sometimes very critical of those large reviewers. I know they have a lot to do. I know they have a lot on their mind. But once you write a script and you have a sentence like, I have to assume the physical battery is a lot smaller, and you don't, like, he could have literally asked Apple there.
On while I'm testing. And then the final sort of extra perks, the cameras are, while not the priority, definitely better on the iPad than even the top-end MacBook Pros.
Yep.
Because you actually
this is what I defined as like unique functionality there.
Yeah. Although it is weird that they've removed the secondary ultra-wide camera that they used to give you on the back.
Compromises that were made on the M4 iPad Pro are actually very interesting. For one, we have the removal of the ultra-wide camera. It doesn't look that way because LiDAR is here. And I have no idea. This might be like a light sensor. I wouldn't know. Well, it might be visible because it's aluminum. Or it might just be like there to make it look as if there is a camera. And then here's the microphone. The overall microphone system goes from 5 microphones to 4. And Apple gets rid of the millimeter wave functionality on the cellular version, and there is no physical SIM tray, only supporting eSIMs. In my opinion, each and every one of those choices is fan-freaking-tastic. And in my opinion, those choices, step by step, are also part why the price increase was, in my opinion, lower than what many people expected. Even I have speculated that the big iPad Pro would be $12.99, and I have said that it might be $13.99 if there are some improvements to it that I cannot really predict. Like maybe if the camera suddenly got to like iPhone 15 Pro level camera quality, right? Or if Apple, instead of removing the second camera, suddenly added a third, right? I didn't know those things. And I said that at that point, I think it could start at $13.99. And if it starts at $13.99, then it definitely would be 256 gigabytes. If it starts at $12.99, I said there is a chance that it still starts at 128, but that it's much more likely that it starts at 256, simply because I believe that that base configuration would not be very viable, would not be very positively received. I honestly believe it would have been looked at worse than like 8 gigabytes of base memory are looked at on the Mac side. And I was basically correct. And the reason why we got actually, in my opinion, a smaller price increase than I expected are those kinds of compromises. And I also hope that the way that Apple like tuned like the 5G version with like the removal of millimeter wave compatibility and no physical SIM tray slot, Apple was able to use that extra space to basically rearrange some other components. And of course, Apple was able to hopefully reduce structurally weak elements of the device, so it hopefully doesn't bend easily. I still assume it would bend, but I hope it doesn't bend a lot on accident. So again, a lot of smart decisions here, like removing one microphone, right? Is it still probably studio quality in the way that Apple defines studio quality to have 4 microphones instead of 5? I would argue it is, and especially with like better like media stuff in the M4 chip, better AI for stuff like that. I fully believe that they are very likely to match the previous microphone quality with 1 fewer microphones, and that ultra-wide camera that was previously in iPad Pros. For one, I don't really see the point in an ultra-wide on the iPad. The LiDAR is already borderline because it does have great functionality for AR, but not everybody uses AR, unfortunately. But that ultra-wide was like very low quality. It was 10 megapixel, not even 12. It had noticeably more distortions than the iPhone's ultra-wide camera, even older iPhones. So I think that was a very, very smart decision. And I know this has been like a talking point online. Some people said they prefer the glass protrusion for the camera. I really like this design. I like it when the iPad is just fully aluminum. I know it looks like a little weird because we have just gotten used to like big glass protrusions on iPhones, on iPads for years now, but in my opinion, there shouldn't have been a big protrusion in general. There should have been just a small one around the lenses and the sensors. Well, granted, the way they are arranged, it kind of makes sense to still elevate them, but yeah, I would have preferred for it to be basically like as non-intrusive as possible.
iPad Pros. And then B, for the front, it's an ultra-wide camera that's now on the horizontal bezel. So
small complaint here, the center stage camera is not as good as like the traditional iPhone camera, and I would much rather have that camera much rather have the iPhone selfie camera than the iPads.
It keeps you centralized and can also use something called center stage when you're on calls to keep you in the middle even as you move around the room. I'm also just thinking, iPads can have cellular. Like, what if instead of worrying about Wi-Fi...
I cannot use an iPad without cellular. I love cellular. Cellular is for me, not just for using it outdoors or something like that, but I have an unlimited contract these days. It's shared between my iPhone and iPad, so the contract is actually free for me, except for like a one-time €20 payment for the eSIM inside my iPad, or yeah, is the eSIM inside my iPad? Yeah, and it would be kind of almost wasteful for me not to get the cellular version. And I use cellular, for example, during my streams, so that watching my own stream and checking my chat during it doesn't interfere with the Wi-Fi connection I have on my Mac. Sometimes when I do like a super fast download on my PlayStation or on any of my devices, I briefly switch my iPad to cellular, and it still has like premium, like 300 megabits per second plus download speeds. Sometimes when I want to upload something, I might actually do it either through the iPad or through like hotspot, because the upload speeds on my cellular contract are actually better than on my Wi-Fi connectivity. So yeah, there's a lot, and again, this is sort of unique functionality, but I will not like write down every single one.
All the time. My main computer is permanently connected with its own internet connection. I'm not particularly keen on paying a whole extra monthly contract, but It's a tantalizing idea.
It's actually interesting. Like, what is up with other countries? Like, Germany has pretty crappy,
Also, just like the Mac.
cellular contracts, but apparently you cannot get like a combi contract, like one that allows you to use like sharing the cellular data that you have for your phone's contract, but then you cannot receive SMS or phone calls on that SIM. Why wouldn't it? That sounds so convenient. It's also what I use on my Apple Watch.
iPads can also hook up to SD card readers, SSD storage drives, even going into bigger monitors for when I'm docked into my
Functionality has
desktop. The whole
increased over
system
the
called
years.
Stage Manager
Yeah.
that's kind of designed for big screen multitasking. So honestly, you can probably tell I'm a very excited man right now. Like, this could be one of the most freeing tech decisions.
I love that he talks about this with a little more enthusiasm than his wedding. Look, I know that it's an act, right? He obviously tries to play coy about the wedding plans, but just in this video, the way he had mentioned the wedding versus the way he mentioned stuff like Stage Manager, it's fun. Like, I have to say, this is a very good video. It like appeals on like a personal level. It's very interesting. It's like a philosophical discussion about the iPad and tablets in general. It's a very, very good video
that I've ever made. And it's also making me quite excited for WWDC because they talked a lot about AI during this presentation, but they didn't really show a lot of AI things. So I feel like that'll be then. But this could also be a big mistake.
They still showed some AI functionality for like Final Cut and Logic. I really like the way Apple does AI. They really seem to be using AI as like a tool and not as a full-on like replacement for a creative or productive human. It feels like AI on Apple devices that Apple builds is like really designed to augment your work, your productivity, your creativity, but it's not designed to give you the final result almost. At least like the way they do it with like Logic, it feels like they give you like more tracks and stuff like that. They better analyze your audio files, but they don't just generate music for you from the ground up. They don't let you like copy vocals or stuff from like a talented actual artist. Like, it just feels much more Apple-y in that way. And I just noticed that I've been streaming for almost 1.5 hours and I still haven't gotten to like any recap of the event. So that might actually be something I leave to for another stream.
Because, I mean, is this going to be fast enough to do all those things I normally do without feeling sluggish or fiddly? Is the iPad going to force me to switch my phone over from a Samsung to an iPhone?
I mean, you should be using both. In your situation as a reviewer, in my opinion, it's kind of indefensible to not be using both at all times. And then, I mean, you could be super crazy, right? And have like an iPhone and an iPad that's basically working in tandem with the iPhone. And if you prefer like a Galaxy Watch, you could still keep like a Samsung phone in your pocket and then a Galaxy Watch on your wrist. But given that you already are, as far as I know, like Aaron does use an Apple Watch, so where would he be his problem with having an iPhone on him?
Because it doesn't have many ports and I'm going to have to rely on more wireless proprietary AirDrop stuff.
I mean, your phone doesn't have that many ports, right? So, I mean, I guess, like, what would be, like, I guess if he was using it, like, with external storage and, like, smartphone stuff, yeah, probably. Like, my laptop has, like, 3 USB-C ports and a charging port with MagSafe and SD card reader and HDMI port. I basically never use the HDMI or the SD card slot. I would have preferred one extra USB-C port. So I kind of agree with some of the more USB-C only guys. And basically, if I had 4 USB-C ports and even no MagSafe, then right now I would be using all 4 ports. One of them is connected to my microphone. One of them is my earbuds. One of them is my iPhone, keeping it charged while also connecting it per wire for like handoff camera stuff. And then there is the charging, which happens right now through MagSafe, but I also wouldn't mind just doing it through USB-C.
It's the fact that, let's be honest, Apple doesn't want you to buy an iPad instead of a Mac. They want you to buy both. So
yeah. Well, I feel like Apple is absolutely fine with like kids who grew up in the iPad era. Like, they know that they will only buy iPads anyway. And Apple just gives the iPad enough extra functionality always to keep people on who are experimenting basically forever with iPad only, but still feel like maybe a laptop could do more. But then every year Apple's like, here's another new functionality, here's another. So yeah, the functionality is improving and increasing, but it's still not quite everything you can, especially when you look at stuff like Finder. But for most people, it's good enough.
In what ways is the iPad artificially limited so that it doesn't cross over with the Mac too much? The file system. The one major remaining advantage that I feel like PC still has is that it's designed for granular organization over files. I need to find out if I can actually have that same control or find a way around it. And then finally, what time...
It depends on what you're looking at. Like, mostly you would manage an app's like internal documents inside the actual app. And some apps let you see basically that internal structure inside the files application. Most don't, unfortunately.
Going to do about storage. The iPad Pro goes up to 2 terabytes, which is great, but I'm an 8 terabyte kind of guy on my MacBook. So am I...
Oh, the freedom of zero financial constraints.
I need to start subscribing to iCloud, become better at managing my files, or...
I find it hard to believe that somebody like, well, he switches a lot between devices, but not between like individual iPhones. So it kind of makes sense that he doesn't have an iCloud subscription. But for him, yeah, I would say like a 2 terabyte iCloud subscription probably makes a ton of sense.
Or just keep a small storage drive that I plug in every now and again. I have no idea yet. But if you want to see what my experience is...
I would say you probably do, like if you have like the kind of finances he has, you probably do a little bit of mix of everything. It also depends a little bit on what you're actually doing, right? Like what files are you editing? Are you editing files that you shot on iPhone and then maybe you recorded them directly to an external storage, the way that now the iPhone 15 Pro supports at 10 gigabits per second? Or are you working with like super large files that you got from like a Red camera or like at least a Sony Alpha 7, whatever? Yeah, it depends a lot. Like obviously, like if you are primarily thinking about like working with like stuff from a professional camera, then iCloud doesn't help you. But of course, if you're doing with the iPhone, then you have more options. You can wait until it's all uploaded in the cloud. You can connect it directly via cable. You can connect an external drive. There are a lot of options. Obviously, and of course, there's stuff still like AirDrop. So a lot of options. Basically, this is why I say tablets are very versatile, especially because they're really, really designed to complement your iPhone. Or your phone in general.
Just like with the iPad, subscribe to help us overtake Apple. We are very, very close, and make me...
How many subscribers does Apple have? $18.9 million, so 400,000 and then some, because obviously Apple will keep on growing. But I think has been growing faster than Apple for quite a while now. So I think for now, this has been basically a lot of what I wanted to say in defense of a tablet, of a fast tablet, of a versatile tablet, and even a very expensive tablet. And I actually am very glad that Aaron has been saying those things, because he has a wide audience. You obviously saw in the comments that not everyone agreed, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm super happy with what Apple has been doing with the iPad. I still think there's more to go, but I do think that applies to pretty much everything always. When it comes to just recapping everything we've heard yesterday, there isn't actually that much. We've obviously talked about everything inside the iPad Pro, from its amazing screen, its M4 processor, even like the way the pricing works with like what you get in the binned versions, the non-binned versions, the lower storage configs, the higher storage configs, cellular or not, right? Even like the option to make it even stupidly more expensive with a useless thing like nano texture glass. Then below that you just get the iPad Air. It's basically in many ways like the M2 iPad Pro, except for it doesn't have ProMotion or an XDR screen. But those are very nice devices with now a repositioned camera, double the base storage versus the previous iPad Air at the same pricing. You now have 2 size options here to consider for your choice. It does gain some other goodies from the previous iPad Pro, like Wi-Fi 6E, which ironically now means that the M2 iPad Air is in many ways actually now better than my M1. But it probably wouldn't feel that way because of the lack of ProMotion and the lack of an XDR screen. Of course, the main highlight sort of is the M2 chip, and I would also argue the price. I think the price is rather fair. And on the Apple, the only thing, by the way, and if we go to like order now, the only thing that I will criticize Apple a little bit here on is like the 11-inch iPad costs $999, and it previously was like $799, and then was $300 more for the 13-inch. However, the difference was that the previous 11-inch iPad Pro had only a ProMotion LCD screen, while the 13-inch iPad Pro previously had an XDR display, right? A mini LED panel that was much more expensive. Now that they have the same display technology, I don't actually think that this price difference is fair. However, I do think that Apple wanted to just price both devices at $200 more and not have consumers argue about it, because they obviously didn't want to reduce margins on this device. Because if this was now suddenly $1199, the same price as the previous 13-inch at 256 gigabytes, now we would be in a little bit of trouble because the screen is more expensive. I assume the M4 chip is more expensive. Yeah, so this is definitely done for margin purposes. Now on the iPad Air, the difference makes more sense. It's $200. But when we look at actually at Macs, and specifically the MacBook, well, let's start with the MacBook Air actually. The MacBook Air price difference between the 13 and 15-inch model is $200, but for those $200, the MacBook Air, the 13-inch version actually comes with the full GPU, while if you go here, you have the bint GPU on the M3 processor. So it's $200 here, but it's actually more like $150, depends on how much you want to value that processor, right? But yeah, so you get a larger screen, larger battery, more speakers even here. So you actually have in many ways more technological differences between the 13 and the 15-inch MacBook Air. And then when we go to the MacBook Pro, you guys see, by the way, you can see that my mouse is now working okay. Yesterday I had like some weird bug in macOS where I needed to click everything like 3 times. No idea what happened. It probably came with like the last beta version. But like, look, we need to align the configurations. Let's look at M3 Max. Right, so 14-core CPU, 30-core GPU, 36 gigabytes of unified memory, 1 terabyte of SSD storage on the 14-inch model. That gives you $3,200. On the on the 16-inch MacBook Pro, this configuration costs you. Wait, is that a $300 difference now? 36. Yeah, okay, so the percentage difference here, obviously for a $300 difference, is like basically 3 times smaller, because now we're going from 3,200 to 3,500, while there we with the iPad we were going from 1,000 to 1,300. But yeah, I vaguely remember the 14-inch to 16-inch update actually being $200 So I think I might have been actually wrong. Does that change if we go to the Pro? And I think the 16-inch only has the fully enabled M Pro chip, so that's $23.99. What? Am I 12 CPU cores, 18 GPU cores, 18 gigabytes of unified memory, 1 terabyte of SSD storage, 12, 18, 18, and now we have $100 price difference. Man, Apple is really inconsistent with their price differential. Am I missing something here? Like that, this even has like the faster charger, and obviously like the 16-inch is bigger and everything. Like, it's wow. Apple is really inconsistent in that pricing. So they really want to lure. Wait, no, it's still the 18. I briefly thought for a second, oh, maybe that this is the 36 gigabytes. Oh, this is the 512 gigabyte version. Oh, thank God. So if I spec this up, so I was wrong. Oh, thank God I was wrong. No, but if I spec this up to 1 terabyte, so this is when they match. Yeah, so it's $300. Okay. So the percentage difference I was correct on, but I wasn't correct on my original assumption. I was like, what? No, there wasn't like, okay, so this one starts here. Okay, so different. I stupidly tried to compare very different configurations. Well, different in the storage department, because there's a noticeable price difference between 512 gigabytes and 1 terabyte. Unfortunately, yeah. But yeah, so the MacBook Air basically below $200 for the difference. The MacBook Pro basically at around 10% price difference with the $300, or like even higher percent, like 15% if you're going by the most cheap version. But then on the iPad, there's obviously like a 30% uptick if you go from like $9.99 to $12.99. So I just wanted to show that it doesn't make a lot of sense, but Apple clearly likes the margins that comes like with pros, paying more for something that is bigger, for something that will give you benefits to, of course, not just the screen area, but like speaker quality, battery life, sustained performance, all that jazz. So the iPad Pro 13-inch is not quite great value as to what it could be when you look at something like the MacBook Air. That was my main point. I apologize for getting a thing wrong right now. So, and that leaves us with the last thing to like basically talk about, or briefly again, there isn't that much to talk about with the iPad Air. It basically comes down to the Apple Pencil. Of course, we've talked about it in a way during Aaron's video. So the new Apple Pencil is $129, the same price as the second generation Apple Pencil. So it really feels like the best value Apple Pencil in quite a while, given inflationary pressure and higher functionality that it has over the Apple Pencil. I've outlined why it's exclusive to these new devices and why those new devices are exclusive to the new Apple Pencil. And if you want to save some money, to the stupid Apple Pencil, as I call it, because it doesn't actually connect, it just magnetically attaches. But yeah, so the Apple Pencil is great. Squeeze, barrel roll, haptic feedback, Apple Pencil hover, which is a feature that the iPad Air also has. Also, like older iPads have it if they have M2, because that was apparently an M2 exclusive feature. And double tap, as you always had, to switch very quickly between tools. What I find fascinating, and that is online, people are really complaining about the iPad, the Apple Pencil lineup. And the reason for that is that you have like this web page and it shows you 4 Apple Pencils, three Apple Pencils here looking very, very similar, and then obviously the old Apple Pencil. Now, I have talked about it in a way already yesterday, but the point is, for one, Apple doesn't have a current iPad in the lineup that actually supports this old Apple Pencil. If you are buying a new iPad, you can basically forget this Apple Pencil. It has no relationship to you, and Apple does, by the way, outline which tablet therefore. So anybody who's like complaining that the original Apple Pencil is still here, it is here for people who have any of those products. Which, by the way, this is one of my favorite devices, the first generation 12.9-inch iPad Pro. This Apple cannot take this off the market because people will keep those devices for like a decade or more. And when you think about stuff like the 10th gen iPad works with like a cable adapter with the first generation Apple Pencil. That was a shit show. I disagree with that. But when you think for how long people are still likely to run around with a 9th gen Apple Pencil, 9th gen iPad, of course those people might still consider getting that Lightning Apple Pencil. So, but if you have a modern device, like one of the devices currently in the lineup, you basically don't need to consider this one. And the other one you don't need to consider basically at all is this one, the Apple Pencil 2nd generation. The only exception of devices that Apple still has in the lineup is the iPad mini 6th gen, because Apple did unfortunately not yet update the iPad mini. I'm now pretty sure that the iPad mini will get some form of redesign where it gets support for Apple Pencil Pro and probably a repositioned camera. I like the iPad mini is still more, in my opinion, of a portrait device, but just for uniformity, just so for Apple to eventually fully get rid of Apple Pencil 2, I would assume that the iPad mini 7th generation would like get an A17 chip, or maybe at this point like an A18 if Apple really isn't interested in building processors on N3B anymore, could just switch to an N3E chip. So yeah, if you are buying the current iPad Air or the current iPad Pro, yeah, you don't need to consider the original Apple Pencil or the Apple Pencil 2. Now, some people will say, well, this is still a confusing lineup because, well, there are realities to device engineering, and with the repositioned camera and everything, Apple needed to create a new Apple Pencil, and obviously they also wanted to create a better Apple Pencil. So I guess my only real complaint are like the prices, the first gen Apple Pencil at $9.99 and Apple Pencil 2 being the same price as the Apple Pencil Pro. My expectation for actually the Apple Pencil 3 for weeks was that it would be $150. So I actually was pleasantly surprised. Even Rogers, oh hey, it's been a while. What are your thoughts on the hydraulic press at Backlash? Oh yeah, I cannot watch the video. I have said that I am not a huge fan of that ad. I will not be turning it on. I'll just reduce the volume here very quickly. Right, and before we show it, right, I just want to show people what you mean, Evan, right? So you have like all these old creation tools, right? Right, and like basically you have like arcade machines, piano. What the? My English sort of left me for a second there. Right, you have like part of drum set there. You have speakers. You have keyboards, both music and well, you have like a music instrument control panel here, and then you have like a physical keyboard thing. I have no idea what any of this is. Oh, is this like where you do to capture photographs and then you test this for like color accuracy? Or maybe I'm just stupid. And basically there's a funny song playing and everything gets crushed, including that little yellow man. And then when the press is all done and it has pressed everything out of its juices, the only thing left is a 5.1 millimeter 13-inch iPad Pro. Now I have to say, this is a perfect ad for a reveal. If anybody who doesn't know, iPad Air 2 at laser, I believe. Yeah, I don't think there's like the official spot anymore there, but it reminded me a lot of this, right? You had like a pencil because I will go back to like the iPad Air ad that was built on it, but basically the original iPad Air ad showed a pencil, and behind it was like an iPad Air, because the original iPad Air was 7.5 millimeters thin, and then the iPad Air 2 was, I believe, 6.1 or something close to that. And so Apple took that same pencil that is like your standard pencil, at least in the United States, and then basically what they did, they started to laser it. Now I don't know if this is a computer animation or if it's real, and basically they lasered off like a significant portion, like 15 to 20% of the pencil, and then behind it was the iPad Air 2. This is obviously very similar here in the idea that if you press everything down, if you press everything into one device, which I think this is a good shot to show you. Now, I don't know how much of this might be computer animated. Given Apple, I kind of expect this to be mostly real. I have to say, I don't like waste. That is part of my character, right? I don't like food waste. I don't like technological waste and stuff like that. However, I do have a very easy counter, and I don't want to play devil's advocate here, but I don't think that Apple is the devil here. My argument is that this is what Hollywood basically does on a daily level for a lot of creative processes, right? They blow up cars for movie stunts, right? They destroy buildings or whatever. They build gigantic sets to mostly then destroy them afterwards, because even on like a huge lot like the Warner Brothers stuff, you cannot keep like every single like background image or whatever in perpetuity. Now, obviously, this is destruction for the creative reason of showing destruction. It's not destruction for destruction's sake, where you just basically get off on seeing the destruction happening, but it is destruction that serves like not a highly artistic purpose. Ultimately, this is an ad. By the way, I'll give it a like because I kind of assume it's probably getting a lot of dislikes. And my main point here is, I don't think it's actually distasteful. I just don't think it's very tasteful, right? I've heard some absolutely insane comments on like Twitter where people have like tried to basically say that this means, oh, Apple disrespects physical media, old technology. They don't respect artists that prefer to work in analog ways. They want everybody to just use an iPad. And I just have to say, that's an absolutely insane statement. Apple has been one of the most pro-artist companies ever in terms of like the big tech guys. Even their AI push is noticeably more like pro-artist and pro-art than the way that other companies just try to say, click one button, get art back. This is not how Apple sees AI in many ways. At least I would be very surprised if we saw like just generate any image you want on Apple, on Apple's own like stuff. So it's not the greatest ad. I think Apple has said better, and in fact, I think I cannot play audio because videos that play Apple ads automatically get flagged. iPad Air ad pencil. This is actually a phenomenal ad. It has Bryan Cranston doing voiceover for it, and basically he says things like, "Can I do no subtitles, but I remember it basically from the top of my head in some ways. And he says like, this is a universal tool. It has been to boardrooms and classrooms and living rooms and to outer space, right? Basically this, yeah. And people have written music on it and have done like a business with it and have done science with it and everything else, and they've used it in like the jungle, and I believe there should be a shot for outer space, right? Yeah, that's the one. Though they should have done like an ISS shot, right? And then the reveal is that it wasn't the pencil that he was talking about. It was the iPad Air, that one of my favorite devices of all time. In my opinion, the perfect thickness for any piece of technology at around 7 to 8 millimeters. It had great battery life for how much just thinner and lighter it was than previous generation iPads. It had the amazing A7 processor, like the first 64-bit SoC that Apple made for like Apple Silicon stuff. Yeah, so this was a phenomenal product. This was also when Lightning was relatively new, like only the 4th gen iPad and the original iPad mini got like Lightning before the iPad Air. Well, and of course iPhone and iPod, but those are different devices. They need those smaller ports more than the iPad. Yeah, and this was actually the first in my class. Chutki, you're asking me how I am. I'm pretty well, and hope you're pretty well too. Welcome to the stream. I don't think I've read your name in the past. Do you have any questions, any suggestions, what else we should talk about while I finish my anecdote? When I got the iPad Air, this one, well, I had it in black. The funny part is that I actually convinced every teacher in my school, except for like math class and stuff like that, that I should be able to use it. And because I was a relatively good student and had some trust by the teachers, they agreed to that. So I was the only student in my class at that time, I assume it probably changed, to use actual tech. Right, and it was delightful, especially for like stuff like biology and chemistry, where you can also like quickly look up stuff. You don't have to draw shit yourself. You can quickly just copy paste something from the web. Yeah, it was delightful to use. And yeah, I prefer, and Evan, to get back to what you asked, man. Sorry, I don't think that ad. Sorry. By Apple was that bad, but I don't think I think it was a little uncharacteristic of Apple. But I've heard, like, you have to understand that backlash on the internet is usually insane, because the relevant criticism for this ad is, well, I don't like waste, and I don't like the indirect message that disrespects this stuff. Right now, I highly doubt that those are actually like highly vintage, very valuable products. I think that Apple basically found what they could find for this ad. But my point is that some people are jumping to conclusions like, again, as I said, they're disrespecting art, they're disrespecting artists, they're disrespecting the history of content creation. Apple is just as bad as the recent layoffs in gaming and whatever, and like across other software companies, even though Apple is the only big tech company to avoid mass layoffs. Apple had like a small layoff of like support groups that aren't even like concretely hired by Apple forever anyway, so they basically didn't prolong and extend the contracts there. But Apple is like historically so much better than Microsoft or Google or Amazon or Facebook at this stuff, and people have now jumped to conclusions that Apple is somehow worse, and that to me is just insane. Chutki, you're saying Lightning port sucks, slow charging. Lightning can charge as quickly or as slow as Apple tunes it to. It has it has fewer pins than USB-C, which means if you align it for like the same voltage and the same PCIe output, then yeah, it should be slower than USB-C. But it doesn't mean that Lightning cannot scale. People don't understand that. Lightning can do whatever you want it to if you give it the necessary technological backend. It's not Lightning's fault that it wasn't designed for laptops or desktops, and by the time Apple could have made it or put it on MacBooks, but by 2015 they chose USB-C, they chose the universal standard, and this also meant that they put less work into Lightning. But for example, there's a common misconception that says Lightning is USB 2 speeds. That is not true. Lightning on iPhone is USB 2 speeds, but even going as far back as the 2015 iPad Pro, it had USB 3 speeds. There were specifically accessories made to leverage that. My Lightning port got damaged within 1 year of usage. Well, USB-C is actually as a port probably more likely to get damaged than Lightning, because on Lightning, the way the pins are arranged, you're actually more likely to damage the actual cable, while on a USB-C, you're actually more likely to damage the port. Now, in my opinion, both are plenty durable, but yeah, don't poo-poo Lightning here completely. Lightning has its historical place. It predates USB-C by years. It is wildly superior to micro USB. And of course, it's when it comes to fully digital and reversible plugs, it was one of the first ones in that regard. So yeah, don't go poo-poo Lightning entirely. Maybe you personally had a bad thing happen to your Lightning port, and I feel sorry for that. But there is a historical relevance to Lightning, and I think that even by keeping it on iPhone for longer than I believe they should have, I don't think they necessarily hurt the iPhone by doing so. You can get original Lightning cable in my local store or Amazon? Wait, why? Where do you live, Chutke? I have never heard oh, you mean an Apple cable in basically a normal store? Yeah, but you don't need one. Lightning, again, partially because it's not rated for super high charging speeds. If you go with a somewhat reputable company, not necessarily a no-name knockoff brand from China or whatever, you probably can get basically everything you need, the USB 2 speeds obviously, and then around 18 watts peak charging max. Yeah, you live in India. Well, India definitely has access to original Apple tech, but I mean, if you really feel like it, you can just order a proper original Lightning cable, but you don't need one. Even I over time have moved away from Apple's cables to longer 3-meter cables from companies like Anker and Aukey. So yeah, I don't think you should be necessarily dead worried. I think we are long past that period of time where stuff was catching on fire in China because those were unlicensed cables. And it's not just that they're unlicensed, because something unlicensed can be built to high quality. It's just that it was unlicensed and crap. You use duplicate Lightning cable and charge it, make my iPad hot overheating for a while. Well, yeah, then you definitely should consider getting something else. This is where I say that even to people who live in lower income areas, when it comes to Apple technology, you have to consider, yes, Apple stuff is expensive, but even if you for example, I don't always recommend cheaper Apple products. For example, until yesterday, I didn't recommend anybody get the A14 10th gen iPad, because I said at $450, it's way too close to the iPad Air pricing. You would basically get a lot of headaches with this device that you wouldn't get with the iPad Air. So you better spend extra money and get the iPad Air, or you consider maybe another tablet, or maybe you consider a full-on laptop, right? This is where I said with Apple you pay more, but you really also need to find the perfect solution. With the iPhone SE, I don't recommend the iPhone SE to anyone. I like that it's fast, and I don't even mind that it's a 4.7-inch screen. I still think that some people might want something as small as possible with a home button or whatever, but its battery life is absolute a disaster by modern standards. So I recommend people get maybe like a used iPhone 11 or whatever, if they really want a cheap iPhone. But if they really want something better, I recommend they get like an iPhone 14. And if they want something much cheaper than an iPhone 14 that is still pretty good, then I usually recommend those people get an Android device. In India, Apple products get even more expensive than US because of import tax. Believe me, bro, I know. I live in Europe. We have 20% value added tax, 19%. And we have, we don't have as much import stuff as we have a currency that is technically more valuable than the US dollar. Like €1 is like $1.08. But we still pay like 20% more in euros than in US dollars. So even if you account for the value add tax difference, that's still like a 10 to 15% price difference. Actually 15% once you account for the currency change. Yeah. So yeah, believe me, I fully feel with that. But yeah, India has only itself to blame on some of the import stuff. As far as I know, those import regulations should be getting like lower and lower against Apple, because Apple like develops closer relationships with the Indian government. They produce more stuff in India, and as far as I know, India started to exempt them more and more from like crazy import stuff. So even if something is imported from like China, it might not be always subject to like fees, because well, technically it could have also been built in India, because some iPhones are built in India. Well, I have talked for a long time. Jesus Christ. I think that leaves us with basically, like, in terms of recap, again, I have explained why this lineup is not as complicated and bad as it looks. I have outlined why I think the Apple Pencil Pro is actually pretty good value. I have said why I forgive Apple for not having this pencil compatible with older iPads, or newer iPads be compatible with the old pencil, but I have criticized them a little bit for like the Magic Keyboard discrepancy, which, like, again, Magic Keyboards, beautiful new accessory, great aluminum look. Actually, I was like very happy to find out that it's lighter than the previous generation Magic Keyboard, so it's quite a disappointment that it doesn't work with the iPad Air, which means it will because the iPad Air is already heavier than the iPad Pro, so together with that old Magic Keyboard, wait, why does it have a function row? Yeah, that's the new one. Yeah, that's the old one that would work with like iPad Air. That means the iPad Air is now significantly more expensive, especially like in a full accessory setup, than the iPad Pro. It's quite funny. You're saying you're blaming on the Indian government, they're greedy. Well, they do want to like entice local production, which I can sort of understand, but I do believe that some of those import stuff is disproportionate, because you have to account for simply the fact that not everything can be produced in your country. Like, even that doesn't even apply to China, which obviously produces most of the stuff. So I think whenever you do like crazy import regulations like that, especially in a lower income country like Brazil is a perfect example, because India, in my opinion, India is large and somewhat powerful enough to actually force companies to produce in there. It has like relatively cheap but decently educated labor force. There is actually like the Silicon Valley of India with like New Delhi and stuff. So India in that way can, in my opinion, absolutely can leverage its like enormous population and stuff, its big area India, the fact that there are natural resources there to entice people to produce in India. But then you look at Brazil, who has higher import taxes and stuff than India, does not have the economic power, does not have the same population level, and still wants companies to pay hand over fist to even enter the Brazilian market. That is always just insane to me. This is just such mismanagement of like a major potential economy. So I have more understanding for India there. But I still understand, obviously, that Apple doesn't like paying those import stuff in India either. I definitely think that their market share would greatly increase if they didn't have to pay it. But they have still been growing in India. India is now number one in population. Yeah, it's now well over 1.5 billion. China is like 1.444, whatever. And I know a lot about India. I don't know if people watching this know, but I've said it time and time again. Most of my viewers come from India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, because somehow the algorithm decided that this is where I should be recommended. And that led to basically a snowball effect. This is why a lot of the people coming in new, like you, Chutki, you're from India. I'm trying to also grow in Western markets, but obviously India, with its enormous, also English speaking population, very much appreciated that you guys are watching me. Very, very supportive. And Chutki, you can absolutely love your country. There's no problem with that. I think that some healthy amount of patriotism is good, so that people don't have completely shitting on your own country, right? In terms of I think it's good, for example, when people don't always move out of lower income areas, because that way those lower income areas will always stay lower income areas in countries. I think that you obviously should try to also preserve the environment there. You should care that the people that you grew up with, that share a culture with you, they're well provided for. I think people should also care about that on an international and worldwide level. I've always thought of myself as more of a cosmopolitan and globalist in that way. I know it's for many a dirty word, but I prefer the original meaning of that word. But yeah, loving your country, wanting to protect it from evil, but let's say a foreign invasion. There's nothing wrong with that. And obviously, if supporting your country also leads you to the idea that maybe import taxes should be lower because you want your country's countrymen to have access to great technology at a fairer price, that's also kind of very healthy patriotism. But yeah, I've talked now a lot today, guys. It's now been an over 2-hour stream, even though I planned on streaming for around an hour and 10 minutes when I started this. I'm absolutely cooked because I just also came from the gym. My voice is gone, basically. I don't know if I'll be able to stream tomorrow, but I definitely appreciate that I was able to do that today. As I said in my last stream, thank you guys for helping us reach 100k subscribers. I hope we'll keep on growing, and I hope that the engagement from the community also keeps on growing, that more people watch more videos for a longer period of time, leave more likes, shares, comments, whatever. I'm insanely grateful for all of that. I'm now very, very exhausted. Thank you all who tuned in also and made the live chat a lot livelier. I appreciate all kinds of support, but if you are here and if you're watching me live, consider supporting this channel with a super chat or a super sticker. Consider if you want to support this channel directly for a prolonged period of time, you can subscribe to my Patreon. The link is in the description of this channel. But of course, watch the videos, subscribe, like, share, comment, do all the YouTube jazz. Even Chatki, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for commenting. Have a good day as well. Take care. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.